This is Talkback with Peter Christian and John King. 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309.
This is Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 101.5 FM.
Newstalk KGVO,
Missoula's news and weather station.
Talkback is brought to you by the Mustard Seed Asian Cafe in Southgate Mall, by Kootenai Creek Village, the maintenance-free active adult community in Stevensville, and by Dig It Excavating, bringing 30 years of excellence to every job. For all your excavation needs, give Glenn a call at 214-4292.
The views and opinions expressed on Talkback are not those of the staff, management, or advertisers.
Oh boy, we have a full studio. It's a course in language, just learning everyone's names around here. This is John King. I'm filling in for Peter while he's out of town. He's actually in England, one of those really foreign countries, and he'll be back on Monday. We expect to be able to host the show. But I'm going to turn the microphone over because we only have 3, and there's 7 people in the room. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Mirdad Kia. Now, we did a news story last week. On Friday, I ran the story about this big event coming at the University of Montana, the Southwestern Asia, the Central and Southwest Asian and Middle East conference at the University of Montana. Clearly, I don't have my words together. So I'm going to pass it on to Mirdad to kind of explain what's going on at the university and who we have in the studio, okay?
Thank you very much, John. It's a pleasure to be with you and my good friend Bob Seidenschwartz and Catherine. Good morning to all of you and good morning to all of the listeners. So this is, as John mentioned, this is the 14th Annual Central and Southwest Asian Studies Conference. And as in the previous 13 conferences, we have really an impressive team of speakers, scholars, and analysts who are visiting the University of Montana campus. This year's conference has been organized jointly by Central and Southwest Asian Studies Center, by Montana World Affairs Council, by Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center at the University of Montana, as well as several academic units, Department of History, Department of Modern and Classical Languages and Literatures, the Women's Studies Program, the Russian Studies Program. So we greatly appreciate the amazing support that we have received in organizing this conference. And in particular, I want to express my personal thanks to Bob Seidenschwartz and Dr. Abe Kim, the director of the Mansfield Center, also our good friend Don Loringer, who does an amazing job at the Defense Critical Languages and Culture program. Without their support and participation, none of this would have been possible. So as John mentioned, today we will start the conference at noon with Dr. Dominic Thomas from University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, and he will be talking about a very timely sort of topic, which is really the refugees in Europe, with a particular emphasis on refugees in France. And then following that keynote presentation, we will have Dr. Fatima Sadiqi, who comes from Washington, D.C., a very tiring and long trip yesterday, which ended around midnight last night in Missoula. And she will be reading from her latest book, which has received great acclaim. Then following that, we will have a panel on the issue of refugees in Europe. Once again, Dr. Thomas will be there. And my friend and colleague who is with us today, Dr. Meladen Kozul from Department of Modern and Classical Languages will be joining them, as well as Dr. Michelle Valentin from the Modern and Classical Languages Department, and Professor Lovich from School of Journalism from UM. Then at 7 o'clock, we will have a major keynote presentation by Dr. Sadiqi about women as agents of change in the Middle East and North Africa. I think I've spoken quite a bit already. I want to ask my colleague, Professor Kozul, to say a few words about the panel this afternoon in particular, but how this came about in terms of bringing Dr. Thomas to the University of Montana.
Thank you, Mirdad. Thanks a lot for the introduction. I'm glad to be here with you and with our friends and colleagues who came there for the conference. Good morning to all the listeners as well. When we started preparing all of this, I was just about to contact Professor Dominic Thomas at UCLA, trying to do my best to have him come over, and then his coming over actually coincided with the organization of the conference. So Dominic Thomas will then be talking today about the situation in France concerning the immigration and recent migration crisis. What is actually happening is the actuality, political and unfortunately terrorist actuality that broke into our program and into our lives with Brussels attacks yesterday forced us in a way to get closer to what is happening right now. And so today's events at the conference will keep very close to this events. First of all, Dominic Thomas will be talking about how the immigration history of France articulates itself with today's tensions, what is exactly happening on political level with this coincidence of the immigration and terrorism. And then in the afternoon, we are going to develop more those subject matters with our panel presentation starting at 3:30 in the afternoon. The political actuality is so pertinent now and so linked with what we need to say that we are certainly going to have a lot of discussion with the audience.
I'm going to frustrate everybody the whole time because I'm the commercial sheriff. In lieu of the chief deputy, I guess, would be what my title, because Peter's gone. But we have commercial breaks about every 10 minutes, so if I make this little hand sign, which the listeners, I'm sure, know what I'm doing, that means we're coming up to a break. We'll be back after this quick break. It's like a minute long. We'll be back and we'll talk a little bit more with the guests coming up here on Talkback.
As a community credit union, we're not for profit and owned by our members. As a result, we usually offer better rates and less service charges than your ordinary everyday bank. Over there, you're just another customer. With us, you're an owner. Join today. Montana Educators Credit Union. Everything we do for you. Federally insured by NCUA. Online at mtedcu.org.
Honey, I'm really worried about our retirement funds.
Oh, me too. We lost so much value in the recession in the stock market. I'm worried we won't have enough to retire.
Jim next door told me that he had set up a new kind of IRA with the Gold Silver Group. He said how simple and safe it was. It's a private storage IRA, and we could have real gold and silver in our hands.
Really? You mean we can actually see it and touch it?
Absolutely. Jim said we could have all the benefits of an IRA to help build our retirement income. Bottom line, we would own a real tangible asset, and we would have the security of knowing we're protected no matter what the economy does. What do you think?
I think we need to find out how to get our own private storage IRA. We need to call the Gold Silver Group right now.
Are you ready to protect your future? Call 800-425-6588 now to find out how easy and safe it is to set up a private storage IRA with Gold Silver Group and find out how you can qualify for up to $700 in free silver. All transactions are privately delivered and fully insured. Please call us now. 800-425-6588. 800-425-6588.
As far back as she can remember, Amy loved computers, how they worked, what they could do. They were a challenge. She wanted to learn as much as she could. So she harnessed her passion, and now she's a cybersecurity officer in the military. If you have a passion, a vision for your future in any field, todaysmilitary.com can be your path to a fulfilling career. You have a calling, we have an answer. Find your way at todaysmilitary.com.
All right, we're back on the Talk Back show, and I want to go ahead and turn the mic over to Mladen. who's going to introduce our special guest for this segment. So go ahead, Milan.
Thank you, John. I would like to extend my thanks to Mehrdad and to introduce Professor Dominic Thomas, who we are lucky to have on campus. Dominic just flew in from Europe a few days ago and was very close to dramatic events that took place these last days. I would like to ask Dominic to, tell us what he actually saw and how it is going to be related to what he will be telling us today in his keynote presentation at noon and later on in the panel starting 3:30 in the afternoon. Hi, Dominic.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here on Talkback and to be at the University of Montana with such a great group of distinguished guests. Yes, I just returned from Europe, where, of course, these questions are very much of the day. During my recent visit there, Salah Abdeslam was arrested in Brussels. So, of course, this became the major news item throughout the European Union. One sees an increasing kind of police and militarized presence around the 20 member states of the European Union. The whole question of border control is back on the agenda. As one moves around, there is increasing security checks and so on. But I would say that one of the things that I hope we will have an opportunity to discuss this morning is really the ways in which so many of these different questions are being addressed at the conference and are, of course, of tremendous pertinence today. The news has been focusing, of course, on the question of terror, and I can't sufficiently sort of underscore the aspect that this is very much a kind of globalized problem. The media has tended to sort of over-focus on attacks in France, in London, in Madrid, Brussels, and so on. But let's not forget that this has also very much impacted people's lives elsewhere, whether it's been the Middle East, in different parts of Africa, whether it's in Tunisia or in sub-Saharan Africa, in places like the Ivory Coast, Mali, Burkina Faso, and so on. So it's a global problem, and everyone is concerned by this. People are also concerned and focusing on and discussing the whole question of the global migration crisis, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The question of immigration, the question of migrants, the question of refugees, and how these different populations are categorized. Of course, the question of Islam is an incontrovertible one. And all of these issues, in the way in which they are shaping the current election in the United States, are also, let's not forget, focusing national elections in the 28 European Union states. And so I'd like to turn to that as well in our discussions this morning.
Well, that narrows it down not at all, right? Go ahead.
Yeah. Our other speaker is Dr. Fatima Sadiqi, and she will be reading from her book, as we mentioned. But also, she will deliver the keynote presentation tonight at 7 o'clock at the University Center Theater, and that will be a major presentation on issue of women's movement and women as agents of change in the Middle East and North Africa. So I would like to ask Dr. Sadiqi to say a few words, as Dominic just did, about her own presentation this afternoon and tonight. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mehrdad, for this nice presentation. I am very happy to be here at Montana. I am very much excited and looking forward to discussions. And as Dominic mentioned, this is a very timely context for us to talk about these things. Well, what I would be focusing on is what I think to be the missing part in the global discussions of terror right now. Like it seems like, from my reading at least, and also from what I observed, I have also traveled in Europe, and I lived in Morocco all my life, is that the attitude to all this is twofold. So what's happening is either a backlash on interventions in the Middle East, and especially, or it is the true face of Islam. But people seem to forget the insider view, what youth, what women, what people think from inside majority Muslim countries, who constitute actually the first victim of all this. So, and I will also mention women and how they have been there, and how also they constitute, I believe, the hope in the future.
Thank you very much. Bob, please, go ahead.
For Dr. Sadiqi and Tomas, in terms of what you just said, take us to a city inside of Brussels, Molenbeek, and talk to us. Give us a description of what it would be like to be living inside that city, to your point about looking at it from the eyes of the people right there in the middle of this. So if you could share a little bit, because this is one of the cities that's right in the middle that was harboring the gentleman that was recently caught, and there's a lot of story behind it. So if you would, please.
Dominic, with you first, and then...
Well, all right. So maybe, we've been talking about this a little bit already this morning, and let's slow it down a little bit. And just a couple of things I want to say. First of all, the very title of this show, Talkback, is very important, because I think that talking about these issues, having a conversation about these issues is extremely important. The political rhetoric has tended to over-focus on a broad range of sort of problems, but has not been accompanied by the kind of analysis which this conference is going to try and target. So I'm going to just talk, first of all, about the French context before we look at the Belgian context. Let's not forget that both of these countries, France and Belgium, have very long colonial histories, right? Which means that essentially during the 19th century, all the way up until the middle part of the 20th century, these countries had very important colonies on the African continent. In the case of Belgium, what has now become the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which was Leopold's Congo, a country that is the size of the US east of the Mississippi, right? So a very large, very rich natural resources and so on. Whereas France had a tremendous empire, which to this day continues to be in many ways represented by its overseas territories in French Guiana, in Latin America, in the Caribbean, in areas of the Indian Ocean, and so on. So that the very discussion of Europe itself must be expanded way beyond the kind of borders of Europe today. The French applied a very specific housing policy during the 1960s, very different to the British model or the American model of inner city housing, which was to deliberately develop the formerly industrialized areas at the peripheries of urban centers into housing projects. So that the very question of marginalizing the poor, which also happened to be new and successive generations of migrants, initially from different parts of Europe, whether it was Poland or Romania, Italy and Spain, but then afterwards what we call post-colonial populations, in other words, populations that had origins primarily in Algeria, Morocco, in Tunisia, but also in the sub-Saharan areas, ended up living in these housing projects at the margins of French society. So that the question of marginalization is extremely important. In the 2005 riots and uprisings that took place in France, these riots were described as the riots of the invisibles, the revolt of the invisibles, people who live at the margin of society and who have been ignored and for whom integration measures and policies have failed, but who are also, in the very specific context of the French system, invisible under the law, because since the Constitution of 1791, there is no such thing as racial or religious visibility in France. You are French or you are not French. As sociologists, political scientists, and other researchers have shown, this indifference to difference has in fact culminated in an indifference to discrimination.
All right, and with that, we got to take another quick break. We'll be back. By the way, it is Talkback. And we don't have only doctors speaking today. So if you want to call in, your calls will be welcome. The phone number is 721-1290, and we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions and field those questions with our professionals here in the studio and me, the non-professional. We'll be back in just a second. All right, we're back on the Talkback show, and we're going to finish a little wrap-up here with Dr. Tomas, so I'll let you have the
so I'll
field.
just wrap up very quickly. I know we have to go to the commercial break. So, of course, this kind of analogy extends then to the Belgian context. Different sort of housing structures, people living in sort of various areas of the city, but occasionally you find a sort of similar kind of phenomenon of sort of ghettoization of poorer populations being gradually moved into new neighborhoods. The first thing to just go back to historically, before I pass over to Fatima, is to also remember that the historical origin of this is that these young people came to France in the aftermath of the Second World War, and then at the moment of post-colonial, and were guest workers. They were never called immigrants. They only became immigrants in the 1970s during heightened immigration control when countries like France moved towards a kind of lockdown mode. So the immigration problem dates back to that.
So
Yes, Dominic.
Go ahead.
Actually, in the case of Morocco, the first first wave of migrants goes back to after the First World War. So it has always been the case that France, especially, but also the Holland and Belgium and Germany needed the manpower. So a lot of these guest workers went there, and they were welcomed, and we never heard anything about riots or anything. They were most of them were illiterate and low class, but they managed to assimilate. And this is the first generation. Now I think we are beginning the fifth generation. So it's a long history, human history also, that seems to be unknown right now. And there were other like women joined in as in family reunions later on, and families started that. That's how these agglomerations were constituted, humanly speaking.
All right, perfect. Okay, we are sorry for the very short segment. That we'll get to spread out over the next hour. We have a lot of open field time in between every 10 minutes, and we will get Richard's question on right after this quick break.
You're invited to the best Easter brunch this side of the Bunny Trail at Paradise Falls. Paradise Falls will be serving up Easter brunch from 9 to 2 with cream cheese crepes, bacon, eggs Benedict, biscuits and gravy, sausage, shrimp cocktail, strawberries and cream, prime rib, Easter cake, and lots more. Adults only $19.95. Kids under 12, $8.95. Kids under 5 are free. Senior discounts too. Call or stop by if you'd like to make a reservation for the Easter brunch from 9 to 2 Sunday, March 27th at Paradise Falls. Locally owned Air Quality Mechanicals, your new Daikin Comfort Pro in Missoula. Daikin offers comfort for life with the best in heating and cooling systems. The Daikin Comfort Promise means you're completely satisfied with product and service. That's why anyone who carries Daikin is held to higher standards. Visit with Air Quality Mechanical at the Home and Garden Show April 2nd and 3rd. They'll have a Daikin ductless heating and cooling system up and running. And you can find out more about Daikin at airqualitymechanical.com. Garden of Eden invites you to hop on down the bunny trail that leads to the annual Easter Egg Extravaganza, Saturday, March 26th at 1 p.m. The largest Easter egg hunt in Montana is free and open to all kids age 9 and under. Kids are lined up around the University of Montana campus oval according to age groups, so it's good to get there early. Plus, there's lots to do before and after the egg extravaganza. The oval is packed with over 30,000 eggs filled with prizes and treats donated by Garden of Eden and many other generous local businesses and organizations. And there are some extra special eggs with gift tags for a bike, University of Montana summer camps, and lots more. Monty, the UM mascot, / the Missoula Mauler hockey mascot, of course the Easter Bunny, and other lovable characters will be there too. The Galloping Grizz food truck, a bounce house, fire truck, and hockey puck shootout game will add to the fun. The Easter Egg Extravaganza, Saturday, March 26th at 1 p.m. on the University of Montana Oval. Don't be late. Sponsors include Garden of Eden, University of Montana Relations, Buffalo Wild Wings, and Newstalk KGVO.
Offer may not apply to all areas. Are your student loan debts crushing your budget? Do you owe more than $10,000 in federal student loans? We may have great news for you. As a qualifying applicant, you could have your entire federal student loan forgiven. That's right. Call Nationwide Student Servicing at 800-295-6099. 800-295-6099. If you work for a nonprofit, if you're a firefighter, nurse, teacher, police officer, or other government employee and have over $10,000 of federal student loans, call us at 800-295-6099. That's 800-295-6099. Using recently released new U.S. government programs, our loan specialists can help you fix your student loans. We've helped thousands already. Call our loan advisors now and make sure you receive maximum loan forgiveness, loan reduction, or consolidation. End the anxiety. Call Nationwide Student Servicing now, 800-295-6099. 800-295-6099.
This is Talkback with Peter Christian and John King. 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309.
This is Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 101.5 FM.
Newstalk KGVO.
Missoula's news and weather station.
Talkback is brought to you by Bulls Eyewear, where they offer some of the lowest prices in town on contact lenses. See Lynette at Bulls Eyewear, 2910 South Reserve. By Nissan and Hyundai of Missoula. They're under new management and offering rebates, discounts, and 0% financing on a huge selection of inventory. Stop by and check out their HD diesel trucks and sporty all-wheel drives. Nissan and Hyundai of Missoula on Brooks near Southgate Mall. And by Selway Armory, 2825 Stockyard Road, Unit E6. More guns and ammo than anyone in Missoula and the best prices in Montana. Montana's premier firearms dealer.
The views and opinions expressed on Talkback are not those of the staff, management, or advertisers.
Man, I love reading that Selway Armory ad when we have people from out of country or maybe even out of state. It's a pleasure. We have a big group in studio. Real quick, Mirdad, if you could just run through all of our guests, and then we'll go to our caller, Richard, who's been waiting patiently.
Yes, so we have with us Dr. Fatima Sadiqi, who is coming from Washington, D.C., the Woodrow Wilson Center, and she will be delivering a keynote presentation this evening on women's movement in North Africa. I have also with us the distinguished professor and friend, Dr. Meladen Kozul from the Department of Modern and Classical Languages, and Dominic, who's coming from UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, and he will be speaking today at noon, presenting a keynote on the refugee and migration issues in Europe. But also, Dominic will be with Meladen and two other colleagues in a roundtable this afternoon as well, speaking about the refugee issues.
Very cool. All right, I'm going to do something a little bit different today. So, when you call in, I'm going to have to give them a second to speak back to you because I'm going to have to turn our microphones off. So we'll be able to hear you together as a group here in the studio because we just don't have enough headphones, the limitations of technology sometimes. So, Richard, thank you so much for calling in. You're on the air. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, I would like to ask why the guests use the choir, and when will we start realizing that Islam is a political agenda and not a religion? That Muhammad was a vile, evil, murdering, lying pedophile.
All right, thanks for your call, sir. So let's go ahead. Who wants to respond first? No one's jumping at the bit.
I'm
there we go.
I'm definitely jumping in.
Okay,
Thank you for calling. As I said earlier, the whole purpose here is for us to have a a conversation, and obviously there are going to be a wide range of views on this particular question. I think that to ignore the link between these contemporary issues and problems and Islam is foolish. But to reduce the global population of Muslims to one group that behaves in a homogeneous way, thinks in the same way, is raised in the same way and trained in the same way is a gross error. What we have here is essentially a global crisis that is between states, that is between terrorist organizations, and also organized crime. What we have here is a juxtaposition of a Western perspective that defines itself as being somehow modern, civilized, and developed, and there's a very long and problematic history of these models being imposed on other areas of the world, contrasted or compared with a religion that is deemed backward, patriarchal, that somehow doesn't cater for women, and in which individual Muslims don't have agency, choice, and an ability to function autonomously in the decision-making. So the sorts of comments that we've been hearing both by political parties in Europe and during the presidential campaign in the United States that reduce all Muslims to some kind of identifiable category are hugely problematic and actually do not advance the conversation, but fuel a kind of war of identities that is not helpful and that is not going to address the problems that we're trying to deal with in a productive way today.
So, go ahead.
Yes, I entirely agree. And I can only add that it's very dangerous actually to mix faith with politics. And what's happening now is you see a Muslim faith, which is hijacked and politicized and creating, and this will create problems. There is, yes, I entirely agree with this, and I think that the other thing is that revelation. You cannot actually discuss revelation. We have three religions with the same. You mentioned patriarchy. I happen to know something about that. There is patriarchy in the three religions, so we are not discussing revelation. That's a huge mistake. But we are discussing how religion is brought in politics, and this is playing in the hands of extremists of all boards, I mean, inside and outside Muslim countries.
Right. It's also interesting to look at, just say, a country like France, once again, to go back to, and to even look at a term like immigration and how it connects with these sorts of questions. There is, in fact, in the French language, one word, immigration. I'm just giving you the French pronunciation of the word immigration, which designates two things: migration, so the sort of the crossing of international borders, and the internal dynamics of ethnic relations, race relations, and so on. And I would argue that when you look at a history like the United States or the United Kingdom, through the civil rights movement of the 1950s and the 1960s, the ways in which these questions have been talked about in society, that some progress has been made in that area. These kinds of conversations have not yet taken place in a country like France, which continues to see itself in a very paternalistic way in relation to the other, and is a country in which there is a separation between church and state. But in fact, this identity crisis extends way beyond the whole consideration of Islam. There is a crisis in the Catholic community. There is a crisis around issues of gender and marriage and so on as well.
All right, thanks so much. We have 3 lines open. Give us a call, 721-1290. They're not afraid to take your questions, and I'm not afraid to give them to them. So give us a call, 721-1290 is the number. We're going to go to a quick break, and we'll be back. All right, we're back on the Talkback Show, taking your questions and maybe getting answers. I don't know. I guess this is one of those issues where no one's going to feel really satisfied until there is a universal solution. We have a caller. It's is it Brandy? Brenda. So I'm going to go ahead and pipe Brenda on through. So Brenda, just be patient. When you offer your question, they won't be able to respond immediately because of the microphone issue. But okay, Brenda, you're on the air.
Okay, what I want to know is we keep hearing that the people who are doing all these horrendous things are extremists, and that most of the Muslims in the world are peaceful, decent people. I'm sure that's true. But what I want to know is why are we not hearing from those people who are Muslims who object to what's going on? Is it because they'll get killed if they speak out? I don't know. But that's a big question in my mind, and I'd like to hear your guests discuss that.
All right, thanks so much for the call, Brenda. Thanks for the call. All right.
The best way to address issues like this is to look at oneself and maybe share something with you. You see, I am a Muslim. I was born Muslim, raised in a Muslim context, and I remember when I first left Morocco to London for my PhD, and that was the first time I was going to live with another religion, and I still remember vividly the first day when I was told that my supervisor was Jewish at that time. I was almost I called my father, and they wanted to go back because I thought he was going to fail me because we were supposed to be bitter enemies at that time, and they wrote a lot about this story. That's how I understood. But later on, I mean, we became friends, and I learned everything from this Jewish professor. And actually, I learned that even he was an atheist, but for me, he was Jewish. And we became friends, and I'm still in contact. He passed away, and I'm still in contact with his 3 daughters. So, as I said, I mean, religion is something that should not, and history has shown us. I mean, this is not only in Islam, but Inquisition in Europe. I mean, history is full of these things where we should not. I mean, we should respect each other's religion and understand that there is a fine line when that religion becomes politics. So I think that it broadens your view. It's not good to stay in one religion. It's good to reach out and understand other cultural differences and how people live with this. Well, you mentioned how people, well, you see, after 9/11, I spent a lot of time trying to convince my own students that Americans are good people. Yeah, because, I mean, after 9/11, a lot of youth, including my own sons, they thought at one point that they were excluded that because they were Muslim and so on. So it took us a lot of working on ourselves and being educated to understand that it's not religion, it's only politics, and it's good to go to cross the line and not like fall in the trap of people using religion for political reasons.
Fatima, you said something that caught my attention. You said when you went to England, that, he was Jewish, he had bitter enemies.
Yeah.
Where did that reinforcement and doctrine come in your life? What was it that surrounded you that had that belief system within you until you've, of course, learned differently?
I had
reinforcing types of assumptions and values of other people?
Yes, I came face to face with my own stereotypes. And I understood that this was, I was doing linguistics. This was a linguistic scholar who actually taught me everything, not only in scholarship, but also in life. He took me to his house. And I had he took me and he introduced me to his family, and we had to celebrate some Jewish ceremonies together. And I came back, and I also educated my own father, because he said, stop, hey, come back. Something will happen to you. But in the end, I mean, when this man died, my father actually sent a note to his family, something I could never have imagined before. So I think, yes, I mean, these things, that they shock you, of course, and the media also plays a role in that. But afterwards, you ask yourself questions. Why are things the way they are? Yeah.
I think what's, what you're saying and what is actually universal is that we find actually that it is, relatively sort of, universal to either fear the other or to demonize the other. And it's moving towards the other that's the most important thing. And I think that in the field of higher education, this is the number one responsibility that we have, especially working in sort of cross-cultural analysis. I know that my own best experiences have been in encouraging American students to study abroad elsewhere in the world. This is the opportunity for them to confront their own identity constructions, models, paradigms, and compare those with the ways in which they are seen when they travel elsewhere in the world, to realize that actually the other is not that different from what they really look like and are.
So yes, Dominic, I heard a word. I have to speak. Study abroad. Do you know what my husband are doing now in Morocco? We created a study abroad program where we receive young Americans who come completely ignorant of the culture, and we teach them these things. Yeah, there's some.
I wanted to get your take on part of Brenda's question, which I don't feel was fully addressed. She has the feeling, as someone that watches the news and listens to radio news at least, that there just isn't a lot of outspoken from the Muslim community against the terrorist atrocities that are being committed on behalf of some people in the Muslim faith. And I guess my question for you is this: when you think, whether it's because of media blackout, because we look at the blood and not necessarily the white stuff that happens, when we're looking at this issue, when you think of a Muslim community coming out and being outspoken against these terrorist acts, what do you think of? Where do you point to, and where would you point people to look at to hear those messages?
Well, let me answer this, please. You see, in Morocco, for example, we have always, at least as women trying to gain rights and so on, thought that Salafists, for example, were our bitterest enemies because they were like extremist Islamists. For a long time, I thought so. But guess what? During the last months, I would say, a lot of these people whom I consider Salafists are coming with fatwas, with religious decrees condemning ISIS and looking at the things from inside. I mean, things that I could not as a woman do, and I don't have the capacity to do. So a lot of these things are simply not known. A lot of people are reacting to terror from inside the countries.
All right, we have to go to a break. Maybe we'll get Dr. Tomas' response when we get back. I'm also curious, even if you're not an outright supporter of terror, there's many people, at least from what I've read in Pew Research studies, et cetera, within the Muslim community that espouse views that just are hard for us in the West to deal with, especially when it comes to views towards women or when it comes to leaving the Muslim faith and whether or not there should be the freedom to do that. And those concerns, I think, are at the top of our list when we're talking about this Muslim group as a Muslim majority, if I'm not mistaken, when it comes to some of those beliefs. We'll come back after this quick break.
Welcome to the jungle, Skiesta Retro Jungle at the beach at Lost Trail Powder Mountain. April 2nd, join Lost Trail Powder Mountain for Skiesta. Registration is in the lodge from 9 until 11. Air and Style at 1 and Pond Skim at 3. Pizza by Lost Trail Hot Springs and Zaxxon Coffee Wagon. The Skiesta Retro Jungle on the beach at Lost Trail, April 2nd. For more information, visit them at losttrail.com. Lost Trail Powder Mountain. Go for the snow.
The mustard seed is open. Please excuse the construction in the parking lot, but know that there's still plenty of parking in front of JCPenney, right by the front doors of the mustard seed. As the mall moves forward with their expansion plan, the mustard seed continues to make it fresh. From old favorites like teriyaki and Osaka to new dishes like pad thai and Mongolian beef. The mustard seed is open for lunch, dinner, takeout, and delivery, and happy hour every day at Southgate Mall, Missoula.
If you or someone you know is addicted to drugs or alcohol, this could be the most important message of your life. Write down this number or store it in your cell phone. But call 1-800-426-6186. That's 1-800-426-6186. By calling the treatment helpline for drug and alcohol addiction, you can turn your life around. Our advisors will match you with a proven 5-star luxury treatment center that will end your drug or alcohol addiction once and for all. Your future can still be bright. When you call right now, you'll speak to a recovering addict who understands what you're going through. Let us help you break your addiction to drug or alcohol before it's too late. This call is completely confidential, and if you have private insurance, there should be no cost to you. Take 5 minutes of your time and call right now. It may change your life for the better. Call 1-800-426-6186. That's 1-800-426-6186. Call 1-800-426-6186.
I remember the day when one of my best friends called and told me that his father had died. We cried together. This devastated his family. But even more devastating, they invested his death benefit in the stock market. And in the crash of 2008, they lost over $1 million. All of their hopes and dreams were shattered yet again. My name is Brent Tixon. After that market crash devastated my friend's family, I determined that would not happen to anyone else that I knew. After years of research, I did find a better way. So today, I'm giving you a free copy of my best-selling book, Secure Your Retirement Dreams with Safe Money. I reveal where the wealthy grow their money safely, get good rates of return, and get tax-free cash loans for retirement. All of this where you don't lose money in the market. If you're concerned about losing your hard-earned wealth in the next stock market crash, then call 1-800-391-0404 right now to get your free copy of Safe Money. The next 47 callers get free shipping and handling. No credit card required. Call 1-800-391-0404.
It's back! Run, bounce, and slide your way through the craziest fun run you've done. Back in 2016 with even bigger, wilder obstacles than before. The Insane Inflatable 5K returns in just a few weeks, and you and your crew are invited back to the bounce party. Bob and weave through the Madhouse, one of our most challenging new obstacles, and get your bounce on and slide on classics like Jump Around and Wrecking Balls. The celebration is on the midway afterwards, and we have games, food, photo ops, and even more this year.
The Insane Inflatable 5K is coming to Missoula on Sunday, May 8th at the University Golf Course on South Avenue. Presented by the Carl Tyler Auto Group and this station. This will be the only Insane Inflatable to come to Montana in 2016. So go to InsaneInflatableShop.com to register. Last year, Insane Inflatables took Missoula by storm with close to 2,000 runners participating in Montana's first Insane Inflatable 5K fun run ever.
Check out all the new inflatables and register today at InsaneInflatableShop.com. See you on the course.
All right. We're back on the Talkback Show and talking fervently during the break here. I've got to get everybody to cool down and back on the microphone here. Before we get too far, I'm going to have Dr. Toma. I know you wanted to respond to the last discussion there.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, it's a great question. People are always looking for more information. There've been, a whole range of works published on these kinds of questions. One only has to go on the internet to look around. And certainly there's been in Europe a whole range of public intellectuals that have taken very different positions, in which there's been a very serious debate within Islam about the sort of what it should look like and so on and so forth. What I will say, though, too, is that global Muslims today find themselves under attack, constantly under attack themselves in public discourse, speech, the language of political rhetoric and so on, and are in a kind of defensive mode. And it's very difficult to articulate real, concrete sort of responses to the kinds of attacks that have been formulated by politicians in order to constantly come back to it's not us, it's people using the word Islam in a negative way and this sort of defensive mode on the rather than be able to have a more sort of constructive discourse and discussion.
I wanted to get you guys to focus on one of the questions that I had brought up right before the break, and that was, I referred to a Pew study that I had read a while ago. I'm sorry, as you can see, I don't have the internet in front of me. I'm just going off my memory here, but from what I read, a majority of Muslims, and I'm not just talking about a small group, not the terrorists, but a majority of Muslims held to some beliefs, especially when it came to the way that women are treated and when it came to the rights of an individual to leave a faith or not, in this case, that would be disturbing to most people in, for example, the United States. And so when they think about extreme Muslim traditions, this seems to come up every time I've talked about it. I was hoping maybe you could address some of those issues.
I listening to you, I also think of, because we are confronted with these issues all the time, and also with the possibility of having solutions. But it's very difficult to talk or to think of solutions right now. Now, these are values that have roots in cultures, and you cannot expect everyone to be homogeneous, even inside one culture. So I think the best way is to understand why things are the way they are. For example, take women since you mentioned them. There has always been a dynamic trying to address these issues from inside countries. You have family laws, they have changed over time, and a lot of gains were actually granted to women. And not all men are patriarchs in the way you think. The patriarchy in our countries is different from the patriarchies in other. Ours is very much based on space, so you have this segregation of women at all levels and all that, but it doesn't mean that patriarchy does not exist in other. It exists everywhere. I don't know of any matriarchal. So, having said this, women suffer in all cultures. It's not only in Muslim countries, and we are trying to find solutions on all levels to fight patriarchy in the family, in the state, and globally. Now it's becoming very intricate because of the global factor.
Yeah, I don't know if I buy that argument. I guess, when you come to an issue like honor killing, or when you come to female circumcision,
I'm not defending that.
I know you're not defending that, but I just think there's not a cultural milieu in other cultures where people would say, in most of the ones, at least the ones that I've grown up and lived in, I've been in Japan, I've been in the United States, I've been in Germany, where the men in those cultures would be like, yeah, I guess we're kind of okay with that because of our patriarchal traditions. It's just totally different outsider force here.
Yeah, but there is a reaction to that all the time, and by men and women. And the other thing, that might surprise you is that polls after polls in Morocco, for example, have shown that more and more young men are espousing equality and discarding these things. These are young men.
So you're saying that the younger generations are embracing some of these more Western traditions,
a lot.
But the leadership is not? The
leadership, most of the states are use Islam for legitimacy.
Also, is it fair, if you're going to compare Morocco to Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, there's a wide divergence of views, opinions, culture, history across the Islamic world, and we tend to your point, homogenize this in our conversations.
Okay.
Yes, and it's also important to look at sort of the issue of perspective, that if we're thinking about, you just mentioned, a moment ago, the sort of issue, are we talking about a kind of stereotyping of Islam, right? So in other words, that, that all Muslims believe in child marriage, that all Muslims believe in, say, female circumcision, or no choice in marriage, and so on and so forth. So we have to distinguish that. But it's also a matter of perspective. When one travels around the world and looks at the different ways in which, one of the things, back to travel study, our students who go to Europe are staggered when they come into contact with Europeans and the particular ways in which they view various aspects of American life. Okay, so you mentioned a moment ago sort of, commercials for guns, for example, the question of capital punishment, the question of religion and politics in the United States, prayer ceremonies and so on and so forth, can be even shocking to some Europeans, where there is often a much greater sort of division in the public space. So it's very important to look at the different places around the world, what we're looking at, and what it is that we're trying to sort of understand, and also then to sort of link it back to our sort of the fundamental sort of discussion that we're having today. Look at the United States and the whole question of 9/11, sort of the attacks on the mainland. What's interesting about so many of the things that are happening, just to talk about the European Union today, is that these are issues and problems made in Europe. And I think we need to talk a little bit more about the circumstances and the conditions that have created these social environments in Europe.
Awesome. Yeah. We'll be back after this quick break. I want to get Ray and Tyler's question on, and then we'll get more questions. 721-1290 is the number to call in. Okay, here we go. We're rounding out into the last half hour here on Talkback, an engaging discussion, and we're getting your word in here. Thanks so much for waiting patiently. Ray, you are on the phone.
Hi, John. Thanks. Would a good analogy of the ISIL type people be the Christian? A lot of Christian, a certain branch of Christianity used to be big on hunting witches, and I see ISIL as a militant witch hunters. Thank you. I'll listen off here. Bye.
I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you see comparisons between ISIS and he hung up, but he wondered if there was a good analogy between what's going on with ISIS and what he called witch hunting in the Christian tradition. Do you think it's a good comparison? And if not, if you don't think that's a good comparison, what do you compare historically with ISIS? And you say, hey, this isn't a new novel thing. This has happened before, or is it a new novel thing?
Well, if you look at the history of all faiths, you have moments where extremism really, shows there, and you have brutality, violence, and all that. I don't think ISIL or ISIS can be compared to the hunting witches or so on. I think that ISIS is an ideology which was created globally. It's no one's baby per se. It's something that came, from a lot of things, but for many of the youth inside the Muslim majority countries, for example, it is a geopolitical thing, but it's condemned. People condemn it. They don't see Islam in it, and polls have shown that people and less young adults think that it's just something that's used for power. I don't think that ISIS is Islamic at all.
Well, you say at all. No, it is the first word in their name.
Well, this is what I hope to say tonight, is that what they did is that they actually hijacked some of our most important concepts in the Islamic tradition, jihad, for example, and caliphate, and Islamic State. When these things existed historically, and they're I'm talking again about myself. I have grown up, cherishing these. We say jihad is something we use every day. We say in Moroccan Arabic, and I do jihad every day. This is women talking about struggling to find something for their kids, struggling to work as domestic workers, sometimes to do jihad. A lot of my also international feminists talk about gender jihad. We are struggling to find a way in the Islamic legislative niche there. So ISIS are very intelligent guys and women who have hijacked concepts that mean a lot to us because they need legitimacy.
So
that's what they are doing. I don't think they're Islamic in the sense I understand.
So when you were growing up, the word jihad didn't mean lighting off a bomb. It meant diffusing a diaper.
Well, no. Jihad meant something. It's part. I mean, here we have to start. I mean, history. I'm not talking about history before. I mean, the last caliphate was the Ottoman Empire. But before that, we had 4 other caliphates. And jihad was, like in Christianity, some kind of holy war in the past. But it's part of our tradition and religion. Let me make this very. It's not. But after 9/11, jihad acquired its ism and became an ideology. So we have jihadists, you have jihadism. That's very different from the jihad I knew. Now in my research, I use also jihadism because that has become the current word. But this is, because I am a linguist, I know that there is a politics of terminology that is, that we need to unpack there.
Dr. Thomas?
Yeah, I want to get back to talking a little bit more about the kind of, perhaps trying to understand, which is something that, I find, really fascinating. How does a person born and raised, and I'm just talking about Europe here, in Belgium, in France, choose to go down the particular road of jihadism as they understand it, interpret it? What is it that motivates, mobilizes, and inspires a young man or a young woman born, raised and growing up in Europe to identify with this version or interpretation of Islam? That's what I find absolutely fascinating. These are not young people who were born abroad and came to France with particular ideas and notions. They may very well have traveled to Syria and other such places and been conditioned and brainwashed and so on and so forth. But what is it that drives a young person to go out into the streets and self-destruct and destruct that particular community? In 2005 in France, during the riots, young people protested asking for greater belonging and integration in France, pointing to the kinds of social ills and discrimination that were defining their lives and existence. By 2015, they're no longer taking to the streets to protest through a democratic kind of mechanism, but are choosing to blow themselves up, to make a particular statement. What is that statement, and what is it that drives young people to make that kind of choice?
What would your answer be? My first answer would be revolutionary utopianism driven by Islamic fundamentalism.
It's an ideology which a lot of people understand differently. Some people think that it's replacing communism. Some people think that it's replacing this idealism. But it's a very strong ideology, and I think that even if ISIS is defeated militarily, the ideology will continue. And my view is that it's and I will say this again later on, it's just through women's. This is one part of dealing with the issues, because that what they do is that they bump into very important thing in Islamic tradition, that's the legal, trying to find legal equality from inside Islam. But the other thing is that it's not only Muslims who embrace this ideology, but a lot of Australians, Christians who converted and who have never been Muslim before. It's that's why it's this appeal. And there's also the fact that the way, ISIS sells itself, the technology, the Hollywood technology that they use, the beheadings and all that. Yeah.
All right, we got to go to a break, and we're going to use some technology, too, to take your calls. Give us a call at 721-1290. I promise we'll get you on the air, Tyler, right when we get back from this quick break. All right, here we go. We're pulling up to almost over here on the Talkback Show. We've just got one more little break, and then we'll be done. So I want to get Tyler's call on real quick, because he's been waiting the longest. No, you don't need those if I do this right. So, Tyler, thanks for calling in. You're on the air.
Hi, thanks, guys. Can you guys all hear me? Okay. So over the top of the hour break, which I'm sure you guys didn't hear because I'm sure you guys were in there debating back and forth between the whole room of you, Vice President Joe Biden announced to the world that we're willing to give Brussels anything they need as far as intelligence, as far as military hardware, quote-unquote, anything they need to fight what has just happened over there. My question to all your guests, and this you guys can do roundtable, one or two of you, whatever, take it. This fight that is going to happen around the world, but mainly over there in your guys' neck of the woods, is going to be a fight that you guys are going to have to do alone. Because I don't believe that the United States, the people of the United States, and the politics of the United States are at a point where we are as the United States willing to stand up and fight for the world.
When you say you guys, I think everybody here works in the United States, Tyler.
Well, they're all foreigners, and they all have family and relatives out of country. I'm assuming you've got a linguist who uses the word jihad like it's like going and brushing your teeth or going and looking for a job. It's very interesting. I know that you guys have guests from out of the country, at least that have friends and family that are out of the country.
Tyler. All right, thanks.
Yeah.
We'll get a response. So, what do you guys think about that idea that the United States and other countries are just going to want to pull away and let this situation work itself out without Western influence?
Well, my spontaneous answer to this is that I think we should all, I mean, when I say all countries and people and all of us take responsibility of all this because we are living in a globalized world and we don't want our kids, for example, not to travel, not being able to travel. I know a lot of Americans who would like their kids also to travel to the Middle East. It's a beautiful region, and this intercultural dialogue is very important. So, I mean, I didn't get the question.
Well, I guess the question is, what does take responsibility mean? Does that mean U.S. sends boots on the ground to Syria, we have a war to try to solve the problem, or does it mean something else when you say take responsibility?
Take responsibility, acknowledge, for example, at least. Maybe Dominic will say something more of acknowledge, for example, that it's not just a problem of the Muslims. It's a problem of everybody. It's not only us.
Mm-hmm. First of all, I wasn't there. I'm not sure what Joe Biden said. The use of terms like war, fight, and so on and so forth are themselves problematic. Now, first of all, to just go back to Fatima. Fatima is actually using the word jihad, not like one brushes their teeth in the morning, but in an accurate historical and linguistic context. It's important to have that kind of contextualization so that we use these words in the appropriate way. One cannot live, it's like a game. You can't play a game and decide that you don't want to play the last inning because you just don't want to play anymore. We live in a globalized, intricately, symbiotically connected world. Travel, economics, military activity, and so on, right? So you don't have a choice to think about these things. Now, let's not forget that so much of what we're talking about today actually very much has to do with a US-backed model of globalizing democracy. And what we actually see is a problem of democracy around the world and a deficit of democracy in terms of its most key and fundamental principle, which is equality. It's inequality around the world that is driving and mobilizing and creating the particular circumstances conducive to the sorts of issues that we're looking at today, whether it's the migration crisis, whether it's the question of terror, whether it's the question of religious conflict or identity conflict. And the responsibility is to engage with these issues. The glaring failure of the French authorities after the riots of 2005 is that they did nothing. So that 10 years later, after the Charlie Hebdo magazine attacks, the French Prime Minister talked about the fact that there exists in France a social, territorial, and ethnic apartheid. He himself used that particular word, a word previously used to describe the legalized segregation on the grounds in South Africa, or to talk about questions of segregation in the United States. There is a deficit of equality, and our responsibility is to address those particular kinds of questions as global citizens.
All right, I want to get Michelle's question on here. Michelle, thanks for calling in. You're on the air.
Bonjour tout le monde. Okay, very quickly, one thing we shouldn't forget that in the confrontation between modernity, secularism, and religion, the West, in regard Islam, the West has loaded the game. Remember, all the forces of progress, of change within Islam and on the fringe of Islam were thwarted, were pulled down. Nasser, Ben Barkain in Morocco, the intervention in Iraq, in Afghanistan, all the forces which could have changed Islam from inside have been literally put down by the West for ideological reasons because they were too socialist or too communist or whatever. So that's there were forces of change in Islam. I remember in Afghanistan, right, who was put forward the most extreme, like, Ben Laden, the most extreme people. So the chicken are coming home to roost from the unconscious in a way. Anyway, that's all what I have to say.
Okay. Michelle, thanks for your call. We got to go to a break. We'll be back after this for a quick segment, and then we'll be done. Thanks again, everybody, for coming in.
It's back! Run, bounce, and slide your way through the craziest fun run you've done. Back in 2016 with even bigger, wilder obstacles than before. The insane inflatable 5K returns in just a few weeks, and you and your crew are invited back to the bounce party. Bob and weave through the madhouse, one of our most challenging new obstacles, and get your bounce on and slide on classics like Jump Around and Wrecking Balls. The celebration is on the midway afterwards, and we have games, food, photo ops, and even more this year.
The Insane Inflatable 5K is coming to Missoula on Sunday, May 8th at the University Golf Course on South Avenue, presented by the Carl Tyler Auto Group and this station. This will be the only Insane Inflatable to come to Montana in 2016, so go to insaneinflablefivek.com to register. Last year, Insane Inflatables took Missoula by storm with close to 2,000 runners participating in Montana's first Insane Inflatable 5K fun run ever.
Check out all the new inflatables and register today at insaneinflablefivek.com. See you on the course.
All right, we're back. We've got Dr. Thomas wanted to respond to Michelle's comments. So, Dr. Thomas, go ahead.
Question, great comment, and I think one should not forget too the forces of change within the so-called Muslim world and so on. Let's not forget the Arab Spring. Yeah. Let's not forget the attempt to promote, foster, think about these questions inside, to ask for greater accountability, and also to find a way of helping these countries extricate themselves from the interventions, political control that continue to be played upon them by Western powers, particularly the French and other such things, while at the same time also recognizing that tyrants, to call them, using a diplomatic term, tyrants, torturers, abusers, are also grown within internally, and societies have a responsibility to fight against them as well. And I know that Fatima can speak about this very personally.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the countries of the Middle East and North Africa have also to do their own homework, as I said to you earlier. Yes, and the Arab Spring was an attempt to do that. But again, I mean, it's all intricate. There's also, bigger forces who play into this, and we need to address all these things and have. You mentioned democracy, yes, but when you see, on the ground, what a lot of youth say is, why is it that we have this double dealings with Arab countries? For example, Saudi Arabia, for us, for many youth, is the real source of trouble with Wahhabism and all that. So why is it, for example, that Western democracies don't say this openly? For many youth, that's a big problem.
And historically, I think, if I may add just my 5 cents, there have been numerous democratic movements in the Islamic world, which unfortunately the United States has played a very prominent role in suppressing. I originally come from Iran, which had a very vibrant democratic system of government. And that was overthrown by the CIA and MI6 because of oil corporations and their interest in August of 1953 in a coup which overthrew a fine, functioning, democratically elected government. We have done this over and over, and unfortunately, one of our most important allies, as Fatima just mentioned, is the Wahhabi fundamentalist reactionary regime, which actually funded and armed the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. We have also supported the Pakistani regime. which also funded and armed the Mujahideen. And the Mujahideen were fighting against Soviet invasion, but at the same time, they had and they carried a very reactionary ideology of suppression of women's rights, of creating a Sharia-based regime. And who funded and financed it? It was United States and its regional allies. So while I completely agree that the local regimes are highly authoritarian and we need to do our homework in the region, we should not also forget that Western powers have not been such great advocates of democratization of the system in the region either.
I wanted to follow up with that with a statement. So Dr. Thomas had mentioned earlier one of the fundamental causes you saw was the spread of democratization through, by the U.S., often by force, and the lack of equality in the systems as they currently stand. I have trouble with that argument. I guess it just seems to me that there's so many counter evidences out there of people that have lived in persecution, have lived without equality, that didn't unify under the banner of a religion to try to make a caliphate or some other kind of state. And I guess my question for you is this. When it comes to the current situation, if it really is the fault of the Western powers for sparking this revolution, why do so many of those that have died seem to be Muslims? Whether it's Shia killing Sunni or Sunni killing Shia, it's infighting, it looks like, most of the time, and every once in a while it bubbles out into the Western countries.
I think it's, seeking the force and legitimacy in this ideology, which takes concepts that are very strong in a tradition and use them. Because you see, someone about jihad, thank you for clarifying that. It's the charge, the semantic charge that these words have that have been instrumentalized by a group of people. Sadat, for example, in Egypt, called for jihad. No one followed him. Yeah, he called for jihad. And also Yasser Arafat, he called for jihad to go into Jerusalem. No one followed him. And even, let's go back to the Ottoman Empire, they called for jihad, and countries, actually Muslim countries, allied with the West against the Ottoman Empire. So we should not forget these things.
Dr. Thomas or Bob? Go ahead.
We just have 2 minutes left, and I'd like our guests to please be able to just kind of wrap this up. And what's the final message, at least for this hour and a half, that you want to deliver to our fellow Missoulians?
Well, I think that talking about these things is the absolute priority. It's having a conversation about these kinds of questions, of understanding how the world has changed from a bipolar Cold War environment into a greater global conflict over identities as to what it means to be American, what it means to be German, what it means to be Syrian, and so on. And unless we move away from the sort of systematic dismissal of religious groups and of asking and calling for bans on Muslims or bans on travel and those kinds of measures that have been adopted by various political representatives and leaders, we're not going to move forward on these kinds of questions in any way.
I entirely agree, and I'm just experiencing it as a woman now. Talking about these things is very enlightening for me, and we should not forget that, if you look at the history of Islam, a lot of enlighteners, broad-minded people like Averroes, Ibn Rushd, they talked about these things, but you see, when you talk about educating and the long term, people don't buy that, but I think we should do more in education. We should educating ourselves and others. I think that's very important, and I thank you, John, for this opportunity.
My pleasure. We're out of time, but before we go, I did want to give Meredith an opportunity to tell people where they can come and listen to the speakers real quick.
So the conference starts at noon with a keynote presentation with Dominic, giving a very important presentation on the refugee crisis in Europe. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity, an exceptional opportunity for a leading scholar in the field, Dominic Thomas, to come and listen to that. Tonight at 7, Fatima will speak about the struggle of women for equal rights and freedom in the Islamic world. And then in between, there are panels this afternoon that we should all participate in.
We'll talk to you tomorrow. On Tuesdays.